The air in Willow Creek tasted like a lie. That's the first thing Beatrice Cooper thought when she rode back into town. 8 years she'd been gone. 8 years in Boston, learning to talk proper and pour tea. But you don't forget the taste of home. And this wasn't it. The dust was the same. The jagged teeth of the mountains hadn't changed, but the promise that used to hang in the Wyoming air, it was gone. Replaced by something else. Something heavy. Something watchful. She'd come back to bury her father and claim her ranch. An inheritance she wasn't sure she wanted. As she crested the last ridge, the homestead came into view. It looked broken. The fences sagged like tired old men. The house seemed to crouch into the dirt, ashamed. A part of her wanted to turn her horse around right then and there. Go back to Boston, where ghosts were just stories in books. But then a man stepped out of the barn. Tall, broad-shouldered. He moved with a quiet confidence that sent a jolt straight through her heart. He led a dappled gray stallion, his head bent, but even at this distance she knew. Lord, she knew. He looked up, shaded his eyes against the setting sun, and time just stopped. "B." His voice was rougher than she remembered, deeper, carried on the wind like a piece of a half-forgotten song. Kieran Mackenzie. He strode toward her, closing the 8 years of distance in a matter of seconds. He wasn't a boy anymore. The sun and the wind had carved new lines into his face, and a thick beard covered a jaw she'd once known as well as her own. But the eyes, they were the same, blue as a mountain lake and just as deep. "Kieran," she breathed, swinging down from her horse on stiff legs. "What are you doing here?" He stopped a few feet away, a strange tension in his shoulders. "Your father hired me on. 5 years back, said he needed a foreman he could trust." He gestured vaguely at the rundown ranch. "When he got sick, I promised him I'd keep things running until you came home." A promise. It sounded so simple, but the way he said it, the way his eyes wouldn't quite meet hers, it didn't feel simple at all. It felt like a chain. Heavy. "You kept your word," she said, the silence between them stretching thin and tight. A faint smile, more shadow than light, touched his lips. "I've always tried to keep my promises to you, B." There was something in his tone, a current running under the words, that made her skin prickle. This wasn't the boy she'd left behind. This was a man with secrets in his eyes. He reached for her horse's reins, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was like lightning, quick and hot and dangerous. He led her toward the house, the golden light of the setting sun making everything look unreal, like a memory you couldn't quite trust. "I kept your father's room for you," he said, carrying her trunk inside. "I've been staying in the bunkhouse with the other hands." "Other hands?" She looked around. The place was clean, but empty. A new stove stood where the old one had been, but the air was stale, unlived in. "Just two. Miguel and Thomas," he said, setting her trunk down. "Good men. They're in town tonight." He hesitated at the door. "There's stew on the stove if you're hungry." "Kieran." He stopped, his back to her. "Thank you." He just nodded, a gesture so familiar it hurt. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the quiet, dusty house that was supposed to be her home. She moved through the rooms like a stranger. In her father's study she found his ledgers. She ran her fingers over the worn leather covers, expecting to find her father's familiar, sprawling script. But the entries weren't his. The handwriting was neat, precise, every number perfectly formed. It was Kieran's hand. She knew it from the notes he used to pass her in church all those years ago. He'd kept the books, meticulously, for years. She sat down, pulling the lamp closer. She started with the most recent entries, working her way back. Sales of cattle, purchases of feed, wages for the hands. It all seemed normal, respectable, just as he'd said. But Beatrice had spent 8 years in Boston. She'd learned more than just manners. She'd learned about numbers. And something was wrong. It was small at first, a discrepancy of a few dollars in a cattle sale, a slightly inflated price for grain. Trivial things, the kind of mistakes anyone could make. But they weren't random. The errors were consistent, always in the ranch's disfavor, always adding up to a small, steady drain of money, week after week, month after month. For 5 years, a cold knot formed in her stomach. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. Someone was stealing from her father, from her. And the only person who touched these books for 5 years was Kieran Mackenzie, the man who'd promised to keep things running. The man who'd looked at her with those same honest blue eyes. She pushed back from the desk, her heart pounding. She remembered the tension in his shoulders, the way he wouldn't quite meet her gaze. It wasn't old awkwardness. It was guilt. She went through the rest of the desk, her hands shaking with a cold fury. Tucked away in the back of the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old maps, was another book. A small, simple notebook. This one was in her father's handwriting. She opened it. It wasn't a formal ledger. It was a private record. His real record. And the numbers inside told a completely different story. A story of a thriving, profitable ranch. The figures didn't just disagree with Kieran's ledger. They proved it was a lie. The difference over 5 years was staggering. Thousands of dollars. A small fortune. Gone. And Kieran was the only one who could have taken it. The boy she'd trusted. The man who'd promised her father. He was a thief. And he was living right here, on her land, probably waiting for his chance to take the rest. The next morning she found him in the barn, just as the sun was coming up. He was mending a bridle, his hands strong and sure. He looked up and smiled when he saw her, and for a second her resolve wavered. That was the smile she remembered. Open and easy. But it was a mask. She knew that now. "I want to see everything," she said, her voice harder than she intended. "The boundaries, the herds, the books." If he was surprised by her tone, he didn't show it. "Of course. I'll saddle the horses." They rode for hours. He pointed out water sources and good grazing land. He spoke of cattle prices and market trends. He sounded like a man who loved this land, who had poured his life into it. It was a convincing performance, but every word was poisoned by what she knew. "The ranch seems to be struggling," she said, watching his face carefully. "The books show very little profit." His jaw tightened just for a second. "Times have been hard. Drought a few years back. Low prices. Lies. All of it. Her father's private notebook proved it." "Father couldn't have managed without you," she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He shook his head. "Joseph was a good man. He gave me a chance when no one else would." "A chance?" she pressed. "Why did you need a chance, Kieran?" He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the mountains. "You must have heard the stories. After you left." "I didn't listen to gossip." "It wasn't gossip," he said, his voice flat. "I'd spent 3 years riding with the Colton gang." Beatrice froze. The Colton gang, rustlers, killers, notorious throughout the territory. "You were an outlaw." "I was their scout, mostly. Knew the land," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "But after the Caldwell robbery went bad, a man was killed. I knew I had to get out. Your father gave me work. No questions asked." The pieces clicked into place, forming a dark and ugly picture. An outlaw, a thief. He hadn't been saving the ranch. He'd been bleeding it dry. This was his big score, his retirement. She felt a fool. The polished Boston lady, so easily tricked by a handsome face and a childhood memory. That evening, as they sat on the porch, the silence between them was a weapon. She was trying to figure out what to do, how to confront him, how to get him off her land without getting a bullet in the back. Before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet. 3 riders. The setting sun silhouetted them against the sky, but she recognized the man in the lead. Sheriff Hansen, an imposing man with a thick gray mustache and eyes that missed nothing. Kieran stood up, every line of his body screaming tension. "Evening, Sheriff," he said, his voice tight. Hansen nodded, but his eyes were on Beatrice. "Miss Cooper, sorry to disturb you." He swung down from his horse. "I came to offer my condolences about your father. Joseph was a fine man." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said, rising. "I also came to make an offer," Hansen continued, his gaze sweeping over the rundown property. "This is a lot of land for a woman to handle alone, especially with complications." He glanced at Kieran. "I'd be willing to take it off your hands, pay you a fair price. You could go back to Boston, put all this behind you." The offer felt less like a kindness and more like a threat. "I'm not selling," she said firmly. Hansen's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself, but I'd be careful if I were you." He turned his attention back to Kieran. "Word is, Jared Colton was released from prison last week. He was seen heading this way." Beatrice felt a chill go through her, despite the warm evening air. Jared Colton, the leader of the gang Kieran had ridden with. What would he want here? She asked, though she was afraid she already knew. Hansen's eyes glinted. Mackenzie here testified against him. Put most of his own gang away. Colton's not the forgiving type. The sheriff mounted his horse. Just a friendly warning. A woman alone with an ex-outlaw as her only protection. It's a dangerous situation. "My offer stands." He tipped his hat and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and fear hanging in the air. She turned to Kieran. "You testified against them?" "It was part of the deal," he said, not looking at her. "My second chance." A deal. An outlaw who testifies against his own. A thieving ranch hand. A sheriff who seems more like a vulture than a lawman. The lies were piling up, one on top of the other, and Beatrice was trapped in the middle. She looked at Kieran, the childhood friend who was now a complete stranger, and she knew one thing for sure. The trouble in Willow Creek was just getting started, and it was all pointed directly at her. The next few days were a quiet kind of hell. Beatrice was a prisoner on her own land. Kieran was a ghost, always there but never really present. He insisted on riding with her whenever she left the house, his rifle always resting easy in his hands. He said it was to protect her from Colton. She thought it was to make sure she didn't ride to the sheriff with what she knew. Who could she trust? A thief or a vulture? It was an impossible choice. One afternoon they rode out to check a fence line in the east pasture. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. "Why are you really here, Kieran?" she asked, finally breaking it. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "I told you. I made a promise to your father." "My father is dead," she snapped. "And this ranch is failing. The books you kept are a mess of bad luck and worse deals. Or is it something else?" He finally looked at her, his blue eyes clouded with something she couldn't read. "Running a ranch isn't like your books in Boston, B. It's hard." "Don't patronize me," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I found his other ledger, the real one. I know what this ranch was worth. I know how much is missing." The blood drained from his face. For a long second he just stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and... was it pain? "B, you don't understand," he started, his voice low. "Oh, I think I do," she cut him off. "You saw an old man and a girl far away. An easy mark." Before he could answer, his head snapped up. His whole body went rigid. "Smoke." She followed his gaze. A thin black pillar was rising into the sky from the direction of the north pasture. Not just smoke. A fire. Without another word, they spurred their horses, racing toward the blaze. They arrived to find a whole section of fence engulfed in flames, the fire spreading hungrily through the dry grass. It wasn't an accident. A half-burnt torch lay smoldering at the edge of the char. It was a message. They worked for an hour, beating back the flames with saddle blankets until their arms ached and their lungs burned. Finally, the fire was out, leaving a hideous black scar on the golden land. "This was Colton," Kieran said, his face grim, streaked with soot. "A warning." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a desperate urgency. "He knows I'm here, and he knows hurting you is the easiest way to hurt me." The admission hung between them, thick as the smoke. He was trying to protect her. Or was he just trying to protect his stolen fortune? She didn't know what to believe. All she knew was that her home was under attack. That night she found him on the porch, cleaning his rifle. The metallic click-clack of the mechanism was the only sound. "I'm leaving in the morning," he said, not looking up. "I'll draw him away from here. He wants me, not the ranch." "Absolutely not," she said, the words coming out with a force that surprised them both. "This is exactly what he wants. To get you alone." Was she defending him, or was she just refusing to be scared off her own land? "It's better than putting you at risk," he said, his hands never stopping their methodical work. "I brought this trouble to you. I have to be the one to take it away." "This is my ranch," she said, stepping closer. "My fight. I decide who stays." He finally looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers in the pale moonlight. A reluctant admiration flickered in their depths. "You always were too stubborn for your own good." "I learned from the best," she whispered. He set the rifle aside. His hand reached for hers, hesitating for a moment before his calloused fingers wrapped around her own. The warmth of his skin was a shock. It felt real, solid. In a world of lies, it felt like the only truth. "B," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The day you left for Boston, I wanted to tell you something." Her breath caught in her throat. "I wanted to tell you not to go, to stay, with me. But I had nothing. A drunk for a father? A bad name? Nothing to offer you. Kieran." Before she could say more, a sound cut through the night. Not a twig snapping. Sharper, cleaner, crack. The sound of a rifle shot. Kieran moved faster than she could think. He threw himself at her, tackling her off the porch chair and onto the hard wooden planks, covering her body with his own. A second shot splintered the railing right where her head had been. "Inside! Now!" he yelled, pulling her along as he scrambled on his hands and knees. They tumbled through the door just as another bullet shattered a window pane. Kieran slammed the door shut and threw the bolt. He moved through the darkened house with a predator's grace, dousing the lamps, plunging them into near-total darkness. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was real. This wasn't a warning anymore. "Two shooters," he whispered, peering through a crack in the shutters. "Maybe three. They're trying to pin us down." "The Winchester is in Father's study," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. He glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in the dim light. "Father insisted I learn to shoot before I left for Boston," she explained. "Said a lady should know how to defend herself." A soft chuckle escaped his lips, a strange sound in the middle of the terror. Joseph was a smart man. They armed themselves and took up positions at opposite ends of the main room, watching the shadows for any sign of movement. The minutes crawled by. The silence outside was almost worse than the gunshots. "They're playing with us," Kieran breathed, his voice close to her ear. He'd moved to her side without making a sound. "It's Colton. This is his style. Build the fear." She looked at his profile in the sliver of moonlight. He was calm, focused. The outlaw in him had taken over. "You're not afraid," she whispered. "I'm terrified," he said, his voice raw. "But not for me." Their eyes met, and in the darkness, the lies and the stolen money seemed to melt away. All that was left was the two of them, the boy and girl who'd grown up together, now trapped in a fight for their lives. She reached out, her fingers tracing the faint scar along his jaw. "We're going to get through this," she said. He turned his face into her hand, his eyes closing for a brief second. "B, if we don't make it, there's something you need to know about the money." "Don't," she whispered, pressing her fingers to his lips. "Not now. We'll have time for confessions later." A floorboard creaked in the back of the house. The kitchen. They moved as one, silent shadows in the dark. Kieran took one side of the kitchen doorway, Beatrice the other. They saw it at the same time. The handle on the back door was turning. Slowly, painfully slowly, Kieran gave her a sharp nod. The door creaked open. A figure slipped inside. Kieran lunged, grabbing the intruder, slamming him against the wall with a sickening thud. Beatrice raised her Winchester, the barrel aimed squarely at the man's chest. "Wait!" the man gasped, his voice choked. "Mackenzie, it's me, Dawson." Kieran loosened his grip, but kept the man pinned. It was the sheriff's young deputy. "What are you doing sneaking around my house, Dawson?" Kieran growled. "Sheriff sent me," the deputy panted. "Colton's men hit the saloon in town, creating a diversion. Hanson figured Colton himself would be out here. He sent me to get you out." A diversion. The attack on the town was just a distraction. The real target was them. "How did you get past the shooters?" Beatrice asked, lowering her rifle. "Creek bed," Dawson said. "But they spotted me. They know I'm here. They'll be coming now, for real." As if on cue, a volley of shots erupted, peppering the front of the house. Glass shattered, wood splintered. "They're making their move," Kieran said grimly. "Dawson, take Miss Cooper. Get her back to town through the creek." "I'm not leaving you," Beatrice said. "This isn't a debate," Kieran yelled, checking his ammunition. His words were cut off by the sound of the front window smashing. Something small and dark rolled across the floor, a bundle of rags trailing smoke. "Fire!" Kieran shouted. He kicked the bundle toward the stone hearth, but it was too late. Flames erupted, licking greedily at the dry curtains. The room filled with thick, choking smoke. "Out! The back way, now!" They scrambled out the back door into a nightmare. The yard was lit by the growing fire, turning their cover of darkness into a death trap. Gunshots ripped through the night from every direction. "The barn!" Kieran yelled, grabbing her arm. "We can get horses!" They ran, crouched low, the smoke burning their lungs. Dawson lay down, covering fire, his pistol barking in the chaos. They made it to the relative safety of the barn, the air thick with the smell of hay and fear. Kieran worked with frantic speed, saddling 2 horses. The main house was a raging inferno now, casting dancing, demonic shadows all around them. "Ready!" he shouted. "Dawson, you first. Draw their fire. We'll be right behind you." The young deputy nodded, took a deep breath, and ran out of the barn. He made it 5 steps before he simply collapsed, a dark stain spreading across his back. He didn't even make a sound. "Sniper!" Kieran hissed, pulling her back into the deepest shadows. He was dead. The young deputy was dead. Cold, hard reality washed over Beatrice. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Kieran's mind was racing. "Trap door, in the hayloft. Your father used it." "I remember," she nodded. "But you'll never fit." "You will," he said, his voice grim and resolute. "I'll create a distraction, lead them off. When they're gone, you run." "No," she said, grabbing his arm. Her knuckles were white. "No, we go together." A voice boomed from outside, amplified by the night. "Mackenzie, I know you're in there. Send out the woman. You might just live to see the sunrise." "Colton," Kieran's face was a mask of stone, but Beatrice saw the flicker in his eyes. He was considering it. "I'm tired of running, Kieran," she said, her voice quiet but strong as steel. "This is my home." She looked him straight in the eye. "Our home." Something changed in his face. The cold mask cracked. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since she'd returned, she saw the boy she once knew. "Do you trust me, Bee?" he whispered. "With my life," she answered without hesitation. He gave a single sharp nod. "Stay low. Follow my lead. Your father had more than one way out." He led her to the side of the barn, to a stack of old feed sacks. He pulled them away, revealing a section of the wall that looked just like the rest. But when he pushed on a specific board, it swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening. "He dug this after you left," Kieran whispered, urging her through. "A tunnel to the old root cellar. Said a man should always have a back door." They crawled into the pitch-black earthen passage. The air was cold and damp, smelling of deep earth and secrets. It felt like they were crawling through a grave. Behind them they could hear shouting as Colton's men stormed the barn. They had escaped just in time. The tunnel went on and on. Finally, it opened into the musty dark of the root cellar. Kieran pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and they emerged into a small gully, hidden from the main yard by a thicket of trees. They could see the house. It wasn't a house anymore. It was a skeleton of fire reaching its burning fingers into the night sky. Everything she had, everything her father had built, was turning to ash. "They'll search the barn, then the grounds," Kieran said, his voice low. "We need to move." They scrambled away, following the curve of the gully, which eventually sloped down to the familiar banks of Willow Creek. They moved in a crouch, the icy water soaking their boots. The fire at their backs cast a hellish glow, while the stars above seemed cold and indifferent. After what felt like an eternity, they found a sheltered hollow, a deep overhang in the creek bank, and collapsed, gasping for breath. "They destroyed it," she said, the words hollow. The shock was finally giving way to a deep, burning anger. "They burned down my home." "We can rebuild a house," Kieran said, his eyes scanning the darkness, never resting. "What matters is that you're safe." "And you?" she said, touching his arm. He flinched. His sleeve was wet and sticky. It wasn't water. It was blood. "You're hurt." "It's just a graze," he grunted, but she could see the pain in his face. She tore a strip from her petticoat, her hands moving with a purpose she didn't know she possessed. As she wrapped the makeshift bandage around his arm, he looked at her, his guard finally down. "Bee, about the money," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I wasn't stealing it. I—" A branch snapped nearby. They both froze. Kieran was on his feet in an instant, pushing her behind him, his pistol appearing in his hand as if by magic. A voice slid out of the darkness, a calm, chilling voice. "Your instincts were always your best asset, Mackenzie. Pity they're about to fail you." A man stepped out from behind a cluster of aspens. He was leaner than she'd imagined, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. And his eyes were as cold and empty as a winter sky. He held a rifle, and it was aimed directly at Kieran's heart. "Jared Colton." "Let her go, Colton," Kieran said, his voice steady. "Your fight is with me." Colton laughed, a dry, rustling sound. "Oh, I think not." He gestured with the rifle. "She's the reason for all of this, isn't she? You betrayed me, my whole crew, for her, for this worthless patch of dirt. You were always looking over your shoulder, riding back this way, saving yourself for the precious Miss Cooper." The outlaw's words hit her harder than a physical blow. Was it true? Had Kieran's whole life, his crimes and his redemption, revolved around her? "It doesn't matter now," Colton sneered. "It ends tonight. For both of you." "Wait," Kieran said, taking a small step forward, away from her. "This is between us. Let her walk. I'll go with you. No tricks." "Kieran, no!" she cried, grabbing his uninjured arm. Colton just smiled. "A noble offer. But I'm not feeling noble." His finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next was a blur. Kieran didn't try to shoot. He didn't try to run. He lunged, not at Colton but at her, wrapping his arms around her and throwing them both sideways. The rifle roared, the shot going wild. They tumbled down the steep creek bank, rolling over and over, rocks and roots tearing at them until they landed with a jarring splash in the shallow, icy water. Another shot ricocheted off a boulder just inches from her head. Kieran dragged her behind it, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hands checking her for injuries. "I'm fine," she gasped. "You?" He didn't answer. Colton was making his way down the bank, moving slowly, confidently. A predator who knew his prey was trapped. "We have to split up," Kieran whispered urgently. "I'll lead him off. You run." "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice fierce. "B, please." "No." She grabbed the front of his shirt. "Remember the fallen log? Over the creek when we were kids? I was too scared to cross." A flicker of a memory in his pained eyes. "I told you we'd do it together. Or not at all." "You whispered it to me," she said, her eyes locked on his. "And then you took my hand." "And we crossed," he finished, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I remember." "I've held on to that whisper for 8 years, Kieran," she confessed, the truth pouring out of her in the face of death. "Every time I was scared, every time I was alone, it was all I had of you." His expression softened, the hard lines of the outlaw melting away to reveal the boy she loved. "I've been saying it to myself ever since," he admitted. "Every choice I made. It was always about getting back here, getting back to you." The confession hung in the air, a fragile, beautiful thing in the middle of the chaos. "Together or not at all," she repeated, her voice solid rock. "So tell me the plan." His eyes held hers for a long, breathless moment. Then he nodded. When Colton rounded the boulder, rifle ready, he found only Beatrice. She was standing in the middle of the creek, her hands raised. "Where is he?" Colton demanded. "He ran," she said, her voice laced with a convincing tremor of betrayal. "He left me." Colton's eyes narrowed. "Mackenzie wouldn't leave you." "The Kieran I knew wouldn't," she agreed sadly. "But you were right. He was just using me. Using this ranch." Doubt flickered in the outlaw's cold eyes. It was the opening Kieran needed. He erupted from the water behind Colton. He had circled around, moving completely submerged in the freezing creek, while she created the distraction. He hit Colton like a freight train. The rifle flew from the outlaw's hands. The two men crashed into the water, a tangle of desperate limbs and raw hatred. Beatrice scrambled for the rifle. She grabbed it, but she couldn't get a clear shot. They were rolling, punching, kicking. Then she saw the glint of steel. Colton had a knife. She didn't think. She acted. She reversed the heavy rifle, gripped the barrel like a club, and swung with every ounce of strength she had. The solid wood stock connected with Colton's temple with a sickening crack. He went limp, collapsing into the water. Kieran pushed him away, breathing hard, and looked up at her. His face was a mess of bruises and cuts, but his eyes were filled with a stunned admiration. "Remind me," he panted, "never to make you angry." A wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up out of her. They had done it. They were alive. He quickly bound the unconscious Colton with his own belt. As he finished, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the creek. Sheriff Hanson and a posse of men. The gunshots had finally drawn them out. Help had arrived, or so she thought. The days that followed were a waking nightmare. Sheriff Hansen took Colton into custody. The deputy's body was brought back to town. Beatrice gave her statement, a carefully edited version of the night's events. She said nothing about the stolen money. She said nothing about Kieran's confession. She didn't know who to trust, and the wrong word could get Kieran hanged. She stood with him in front of the charred ruins of her home. The smell of wet ash was suffocating. "The foundation is solid," he said quietly, standing beside her. "We can rebuild. We." The word was a promise. "Kieran," she said, turning to him, "the money. You have to tell me the truth." He finally met her eyes, and the pain in them was so deep it stole her breath. "It's true I took it, but I wasn't stealing it from you. I was stealing it for you." She just stared at him, confused. "Your father found something, Bea," he said, his voice low and urgent. "A silver vein, a big one, up in the high country on this property. He didn't tell anyone. He knew what would happen. A land rush, speculators, men like Sheriff Hansen." The sheriff, the vulture who wanted to buy her land. "Hansen suspected," Kieran continued. "He started pressuring your father, squeezing him. Your father knew he didn't have long. His heart was failing. He was terrified Hansen would take the ranch from you after he was gone. So he made me promise, protect the ranch, protect you, at any cost." It was all starting to make sense, the double set of books. "The money I skimmed," Kieran explained, "I used it to pay off people in town for information, to buy weapons, to hire Miguel and Thomas, the only two men I knew I could trust. I was building a small army, Bea, preparing for a war I knew was coming. I couldn't tell you. I was afraid you'd run. Or worse, that you'd trust the wrong person, like the sheriff. Her father's death. They'd called it a heart ailment. Unexpected. But now—" "His death wasn't natural, was it?" she whispered, a horrifying thought taking root. Kieran's face was grim. "The doctor is on Hansen's payroll. I think Hansen got tired of waiting. I think he had him poisoned." The world tilted on its axis. Her father hadn't just died. He'd been murdered. Murdered for his land, for a secret he died to protect. And the man who killed him wore a badge. A horse approached. It was Sheriff Hansen, a grim expression on his face. "Miss Cooper," he said, tipping his hat, "a terrible business." He glanced at the ruins. "My offer still stands. Maybe now you see this is no place for you." "I'm not selling, Sheriff," she said, her voice ice. His eyes hardened. "That's a mistake." He turned his cold gaze on Kieran. "And you, Mackenzie, I've been looking into you. An ex-convict working on the property of a murdered man. It looks mighty suspicious. I might just have to take you in for questioning." It was a threat, a blatant, naked threat. "Give me the land, or I'll hang the man you love." "You'll do no such thing," Beatrice said, stepping in front of Kieran. Hansen chuckled. "You've got fire, I'll give you that. But you're in over your head." He leaned down from his saddle, his voice a venomous whisper. "Colton confessed, told me everything. Told me about the silver, about the map your father made. Give me the map, and I'll let your outlaw friend live." The map, that's what this was all about. It wasn't just the land, it was the treasure beneath it. "There is no map," she lied, her heart pounding. "Don't play games with me, girl," Hansen snarled. "I burned your house down looking for it. I'll tear this whole valley apart. I'll get that map." He had just confessed. He had just admitted to arson, to murder, and he didn't even care. He had the law in his pocket. He was untouchable. "The map was in the house," Kieran said, his voice flat. "It burned with everything else." Hansen stared at them, his eyes searching their faces for any sign of a lie. Beatrice held her breath, forcing her expression to remain a mask of grief. Finally, the sheriff seemed to accept it. A look of pure fury crossed his face. He had won, but he had lost the prize. "Get off this land, Mackenzie," he spat. "You've got 24 hours to be out of my county. If I see you after that, I'll shoot you on sight." He looked at Beatrice. "A shame about that silver. Would have made you a rich woman." He turned his horse and rode away, leaving them standing in the ashes. They were safe for now, but they had lost. Hansen would get the land eventually. She couldn't run it alone, and Kieran was being forced to leave. "He's not going to stop," she said, her voice hollow. "I know," Kieran said, "but he thinks the map is gone. That will buy us some time." "But it is gone, isn't it?" she asked. "It must have been in the study." Kieran looked at her, and a slow smile spread across his bruised face. "Your father was smarter than that, Bea. He wouldn't have kept it somewhere so obvious." "Then where is it?" "He told me once," Kieran said, his eyes twinkling for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "He said he hid his greatest treasure inside his other greatest treasure." Beatrice frowned, confused. "What does that mean?" Kieran's gaze drifted past the ruins, toward the small family cemetery on the hill where her mother was buried, and next to it, where her father now lay. Her mother, the greatest treasure he'd ever had. Beatrice's breath caught. She remembered a story her father used to tell, about the day he married her mother. He had nothing to give her but a book of poems. He told her it was more valuable than gold, because their story was written in the margins. They ran. They didn't ride. They ran all the way to the town's church, where the pastor kept the town's few precious records and books in a locked room in the back. Beatrice's mother had donated her small collection before she passed. The old pastor let them in, his eyes full of sympathy. Beatrice found the book immediately, a thin volume of poetry by Keats, its leather cover worn smooth by her mother's hands. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The margins were filled with her father's annotations. But it wasn't poetry he was writing about. It was geology. Notes about rock formations, elevations, creek flows. It was meaningless to anyone else, but to someone who knew the land, who knew what they were looking for. And on the inside back cover, carefully drawn in faded ink, was a map. A map of her ranch, with a single small X marking a spot high up in the canyons. They had it. They had the proof, and they had the key to their future. But what good was a map when the most powerful man in the county wanted them dead? They couldn't go to the law. Hansen was the law. They were on their own. "What do we do now?" she whispered, tracing the lines of the map with her finger. Kieran looked from the map to her face. The hunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, hard determination. The outlaw was back, but this time he was fighting for her. "Hansen thinks he's a wolf," Kieran said, his voice low and dangerous. "It's time we reminded him that even wolves can be trapped." He took her hand, his grip firm and steady. He played his game of fear and lies. Now, we play ours, together. The plan was audacious. It was dangerous. It was probably suicide. But it was the only chance they had. They needed an army, and Kieran knew exactly where to find one. They rode out that night, not east toward safety, but west, deeper into the Badlands, toward the last known camp of the Colton gang. They found what was left of them holed up in a box canyon, 3 tired, defeated-looking men. When they saw Kieran, they went for their guns. "Hold it!" Kieran shouted, holding up his empty hands. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to make a deal." Their leader, a grizzled old outlaw named Silas, spat on the ground. "We don't make deals with rats, Mackenzie." "Hansen set you up," Kieran said, walking slowly into their camp. Beatrice stayed back on her horse, her heart in her throat. He used Colton to do his dirty work, and he was going to let the posse hang all of you to tie up the loose ends. He murdered my boss, and he's trying to steal his land. Not our problem, Silas grunted. I know where there's a silver lode so rich it'll make you kings, Beatrice said, her voice ringing out in the quiet canyon. The men stopped. They looked from her to Kieran. Hansen wants it, Kieran continued, but it belongs to her. We're going to take Hansen down, and if you help us, she'll give you a share big enough to disappear forever. A real second chance. Better than the one Hansen ever gave me. The outlaws looked at each other. Greed warred with mistrust in their eyes. Why should we trust you? Silas asked. Because my enemy is your enemy, Kieran said, and because you have no other choice. Hansen won't stop hunting you until you're all dead. It was a long night, but by dawn they had a deal. And they had an army. 4 guns against Hansen's entire county. The odds were still impossible, but for the first time they had hope. They sent one of the outlaws into town with a message, a rumor, that Beatrice Cooper had fled, but she'd dropped a map that was now in the hands of the Colton gang, who were planning on working the silver claim for themselves. They knew Hansen's greed. He wouldn't send a posse. He wouldn't want to share the prize. He would come himself with only the men he trusted most. He would want to handle this quietly. They chose their ground carefully. The spot marked on the map. A narrow, twisting canyon with high walls. A perfect kill box. They waited. For 2 days they waited. Beatrice felt a strange calm settle over her. She was no longer the frightened girl from Boston. She was the daughter of a frontier man, fighting for her home, side by side with the man she loved. Whatever happened, she was where she was supposed to be. On the 3rd day they came, Hansen and 4 of his deputies, riding in fast, their eyes scanning the rocks for a sign of silver, not for an ambush. They rode straight into the trap. The first shot was fired by Kieran. It wasn't aimed to kill. It hit the rock face above Hansen's head, sending a shower of stone chips down on him. Chaos erupted. Hansen and his men dove for cover, firing blindly into the rocks. But they were pinned down, exposed. Kieran and the outlaws had the high ground. The fight was short and brutal. Silas and his men were not lawmen. They did not issue warnings. They shot to kill. One by one, the deputies fell, until only Hansen was left, huddled behind a boulder, his pistol empty. "It's over, Hansen!" Kieran yelled. "Mackenzie!" the sheriff screamed, his voice raw with fury and fear. "I'll see you hang for this." "No," Beatrice said, stepping out from behind a rock, her Winchester held steady. "You're the one who's going to hang, for the murder of my father, for Deputy Dawson, for all of it." Hansen stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. The proper lady from Boston was gone. In her place stood a woman made of iron and fire. He made a desperate lunge for a fallen deputy's rifle. A single shot cracked the canyon's silence. Hansen crumpled to the ground. It was Silas who had fired. The old outlaw looked at Beatrice and gave a slow, respectful nod. Justice had come to Willow Creek. They brought the bodies back to town, along with Hansen's confession, which they'd found in his saddlebags, a letter to a railroad baron, detailing his plan to acquire the silver-rich land by any means necessary. The town was stunned. The story unfolded, a dark tale of greed and corruption. Kieran Mackenzie wasn't a villain. He was a hero. Silas and his men, true to their word, took their share of the silver, a hefty pouch of raw ore Kieran had from his father's samples, and rode away, disappearing back into the wilds from which they came. 6 months later, a new house stood where the old one had burned. It was larger, stronger, built of stone from the very canyon where they had made their stand. The ranch was thriving. The land felt clean again, the air no longer tasting of lies, but of hard-won peace. Beatrice stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of purple and gold. Kieran came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. Mrs. Mackenzie, he said softly, the name still new and wonderful. Happy, she leaned back against him, her heart full to bursting. More than you know, she turned in his arms, her hands coming up to cup his weathered face. We did it, Kieran, together. He smiled, the real easy smile she had loved since she was a girl. Together or not at all. He lowered his head and kissed her, a kiss that tasted of dust and promise, of homecoming and second chances. They had faced down outlaws and corrupt lawmen, they had walked through fire, and they had come out the other side, stronger than before. They had rebuilt their home. They had rebuilt their lives. They knew the future would hold more challenges, more hardships. But they would face it all, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story of justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more tales of when the West was wild.